Hey guys, welcome back to the Wild Courage podcast. I haven't actually done one of these in a while, so it's fun to be doing this with you. So for those of you who don't know, today I have Justin Stumvoll back on the podcast. I think you've been on at least 3 or 4 times, but thanks for jumping on here today.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And it's good to be sitting down with a friend, a brother, and stuff like that. It's good hangout.
Yeah, so most recently I was in Reading and got to be in your studio and do your podcast. Justin and his wife have a podcast called the Connected Life Podcast that y'all need to check out. But that's how this whole thing kind of started was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, you invited me on your podcast to tell my story. And it was like a powerful experience, and I was scared and couldn't sleep for 2 days. And um, but that's kind of what got me here. Well, also, you used to have a podcast with your buddy, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at the end, when that season kind of winded down for you on that podcast, I remember listening to it being super sad that like there's nothing representing kind of this space anymore that I knew of for men and podcasts and story and hope. And that's what planted the seed in me starting this podcast, is you presented a challenge to anyone listening to that podcast to like, hey, this is ending, but pick up the torch and go on. And I was out irrigating when I was listening to it one day, and I remember the thought hit me, and I was like, oh crap, like, am I supposed to do it?
As a side note, I love that Wild Courage, as far as the podcast goes, like that somehow that sparked an imagination for you to do it, because I think it's the only podcast I know of that that call for somebody to do something actually went and did something that I'm aware of. I mean, there could have been a whole bunch more with that man podcast that I had, but men are desperate to have a healthy expression of masculinity that's not emasculated and it's not domineering and dominant, but it's actually like a beautiful blend of heart connect and protective energy and stuff. And I think that Wild Courage is an incredible example of that. So,
Yeah, thanks. So you have been to like 2 or 3 of our retreats, I think. 3, I think.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, 2 in Garden Valley, and then one in Jackson, which was super fun. And I bring that up because we are now taking applications for our spring of 2025 retreat, which is going to be May 1st through the 4th. The exciting thing about it is after the fall retreat, I'm like, man, we're trying to cram too much stuff into basically like 2 days, right? The guys get there on Friday night. We leave Sunday at like 11. So it's a little less than 2 days. So we're adding a day, which I think is going to be great because it'll give us some more time. And we're also changing the venue. We're going to McCall to a retreat center that's right on the lake. So there'll be some activity and some real life opportunities to do more cold plunges and super cold water.
I want to say something really quick about Wild Courage Retreat, because I'm so glad that you're actually doing it. Something that I thought was fascinating was seeing men gather together that maybe wouldn't participate in, like, it wouldn't be their normal to express their emotions in a lot of ways. And I saw a lot of guys that were carrying years of heavy shit on their shoulders, that needed a place to feel safe enough and needed to feel like they had a place where they were represented, like they saw themselves in the other men, and that they were safe enough in that space to actually let down their guard and share themselves. And I watched guys who had spent decades carrying heavy weight on their shoulders, just being removed. And so I think it's cool because it's like there's this space of, they didn't have to lose who they were to express the reality of their emotions, right? They're like, they're still the same old cowboys, dipping tobacco, smoking cigars, having a beer that came in when they went out. But the difference was they walked out with a lighter, like this sense of lightness inside of themselves, and this sense of camaraderie of like, I am not alone. And one of the greatest pains for masculinity that I've observed through all the work that I've done is that there's this sense of I'm alone and I don't belong to anything bigger than myself, really.
Mm.
And we kind of find our connection to the greater purpose in our jobs, and not in our relationships. And so, because we don't know what it is to do relationship. And so something that you've done with Wild Courage is fostered a community that says, here's an example of what masculine relationship can look like, where it's more than simply watching football or hunting, which are great ways to bond, but there's also more depth than just activities. There's actually a heart connect that can happen. And that's something that I found so incredibly beautiful with Wild Courage is you eliminate that barrier of isolation through the connections that take place inside of it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think that it's fun because guys don't know what they're getting into, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they come and that's what they experience is like, oh, damn, these guys are all just like me.
Yeah.
Some of us do this for an occupation, some of us do that, but you strip all that away, those things we hide about or hide behind, right? Is what we do for a living, not who we are, who we're becoming. And one of the beautiful things that have come out of these retreats is, to your point, Justin, is the guys that stay connected.
Yeah.
And I'm not part of it. Like we talk about it like, hey, if there's somebody that was in your group like that you feel really connected to, exchange numbers. And then I still like 2 days ago I was talking to a guy and he's like, my whole group, we're on a group chat and we are in constant communication. And they live all over the country, right?
Yeah.
But something about that not feeling alone. And when you know somebody, like it's such a soul level, you feel differently connected to them. The thing we hear all the time is like, I don't really know anybody. The people I work with and the people I do life with, like how well do we really even know each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I spent a weekend with this dude who lives 1,200 miles from me, and I know him more intimately than I know my friends.
Yeah.
And we're all surprised by it. It's like, wow, it's a
Yeah.
really cool invitation to like, but like you said, you got to let your guard down and feel like you're in an environment where people aren't going to use your vulnerabilities against you to hurt you.
Well, I was actually going to say that is like one of the number one. So let me back up real quick, just so people have a little context. I did a podcast for about, I think it was 5 or 6 years, maybe. I don't know. It was, I don't want to say that wrong. Maybe it's 4 years, but it was a podcast, aimed at masculinity and helping men develop their manhood. And, along with that, I have met with over 4,000 one-on-one clients in my life consulting practice. And now I've had well over 10,000 people take the courses that I do online and stuff like that. So everything that I do is based on helping men and women as well, but helping individuals actually connect to their heart, understand themselves, connect to the world around them. And so when I talk about, some of the things that I've experienced with people, it's coming from this firsthand experience of sitting across from people and hearing their stories over and over again. And one of the things when it comes to men, to your point now, is that most of the men that I talk to regarding having intimate male connections, healthy emotional connections with men, most of them said, I don't trust anybody. You can't trust anyone. They'll eventually betray you. So there's this deep fear of like, I'm going to ultimately be violated with my vulnerability. So the way for me to stay safe is to lock down my information. I'm only going to go so deep with all these individuals because I know if I go too deep, one of these individuals is going to weaponize it against me and try to destroy me. At least that's the belief system that a lot of men had. And so when you see circumstances like wild courage, you all of a sudden see every man having to get emotionally naked in front of each other. And it's like, we're all holding each other's stories. Everyone is holding each other's secrets. So if one person hits the nuclear bomb button to go off, everyone hits it and everyone dies, you know? And so there's this sense of like, everyone's all in the same boat. Everyone all has the same information, and we want to protect that because everyone has each other's information. And once you see the vulnerability of another guy expressed in the way that it is there, you don't want to weaponize it against him. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm being trusted with something that is so sacred and so holy. And that's something, again, that's been beautiful about those spaces is all of a sudden there's like a renewed hope in humanity. I think that I saw in a lot of men where they're like, oh, actually, you can trust other people. There are other people who will understand you and protect you and cover you. So,
do you think it helps that most of these guys don't know anybody there?
I think that that's a massive help. I know a lot of guys like they have this thought in mind. This may be the only weekend I ever see you. First off, so whatever. Here's all my shit.
Yeah.
I get to walk away. And yeah, they feel like there's not preconceived judgments of who you are. Like, you're not in my personal friend space back home. You can't go share it with the rest of my community. Really. There's some of that that's, I think, helpful as well.
Yeah. And I think it helps pave the way for rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't mean you're going to go home and be like, go to the bar and spill your guts to your friend that you've been sitting next to for 5 years, or church, or whatever social structure you've built your life around. But I think it is a segue back into trusting the right people at the right time. Like, oh, these guys I don't even know held my story with compassion.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could trust that again. Whereas that's been taken advantage of before. And
Yeah.
again, those vulnerabilities have been used against me. It happens in marriage too. Like, I
Yeah.
remember when Mary and I, before we found you, and you changed our marriage, it was like, well, I'm not going to share that with her because I know that in a week, a day, a month, a year, she's going to pull that out and use it
Yeah.
against me. And I would do the same to her all the time. And so
Right.
I say all that to say, I get why vulnerability is risky. But when you contain it and you set an atmosphere of trust and safety and peace, you're walking into that, and every guy there's like, wow, I was not expecting this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty, like you said, it's holy ground for sure.
Yeah.
And messy.
It's very bonding.
Very messy, but
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. And you made the note of it's very messy, you know, like that's one of the things that I love about it from the top down. Like, as leaders, I think I got to participate in some leadership roles there as I was there. And all the other guys on the team that were in leadership roles were all really fucked up and messy in our own ways. You know, we're imperfect, flawed human beings that are honest with ourselves about that. And that's something that I loved about the environment, is that there was permission, because people from the top down were like, hey, I don't have it all together, and I'm probably not even going to do things right this weekend. But we're here to try, you know, and that gives it a sense of guys being like, oh, okay, I don't have to be on here. I don't have to be perfect here. These guys leading this are acknowledging they're not perfect. We're not hiding behind plastic masks, you know.
Yeah, or like you said, I love that. I think it was the second retreat where the leaders went the day before,
Yeah.
and we did wild courage. Like, no, to be here, you got to ante up. Like, everybody, and that 24 hours leading up to the rest of the guys getting there is so powerful, because we're getting ourselves into a place of like compassion for story and humanity. that we're not showing up like we got it all together and we're going to fix everybody. It's like we get undone ourselves and ante up, right?
Yeah.
And like push it all in the middle and like, this is what I got going on real time. And I don't have any of this figured out, but we've gotten good at sitting with men in their stories and having compassion and bringing guys like you and Seth Dahl and Britton in to lead us in things that you've learned along the way and share with us amazing tools to help us figure some of our pieces out. So
Yeah.
it's really a powerful experience for
Yeah.
all of us.
And what you're talking about, I think, leads into the podcast of what we're talking about today. I think it's so good because the conversation you're having is one of authenticity. You're saying like, hey, what actually brings a lot of breakthrough for these guys is a sense of authenticity where no one's hiding anymore. And today, one of the conversation that you brought to the table was, hey, I really want to have a discussion about imposter syndrome. I want to be able to define that and talk about that. And I hope that during this conversation with imposter syndrome, we can get into the details of authenticity and the lack of authenticity that perpetuates the imposter syndrome. So
that's good. Well, great segue. Thank you for that. So yeah, this is something that it was one of those things that you know is inside of you, and then you hear somebody else say it and define it, and you're like, it names it, right? And it's like, oh, that's exactly what this feeling or emotion or thing that I'm feeling is. So when we talked last week and I asked you to come on here, I was like, let's tackle imposter syndrome because a podcast I did a month or so ago, I brought it up with, I think it was Justin Reichert, and it's such a thing. And I was blown away by, and all the things we talked about with his story, like, hey, that imposter syndrome thing, I have that. That's a real thing. Thank you for bringing it up. So I thought this would be a perfect thing for us to talk about. But before we get going on it, I thought just so we can define it so everybody's clear on exactly what we're talking about, I looked up it by definition, and I'll just read it real quick. Imposter syndrome, also known as imposter phenomenon or imposterism, is a psychological experience in which a person suffers from feelings of intellectual and or professional fraudulence. One source defines it as the subject experience of perceived self-doubt in one's abilities and accomplishments compared with others, despite evidence to suggest the contrary. So even though there's evidence that this isn't true, we still have this narrative around it of like, I'm a fraud. Like I said on the deal with Justin, we're in a motel in Winnemucca, Nevada, doing this podcast, and I'm like, I still have this feeling, and that somebody's going to kick in the door, and it's like the podcast police, and they're going to be like, "All right, the gig's up, dude. Like, this has gone on long enough. You have no credibility. You don't know what you're talking about. You talk out your ass. Like, we're here to confiscate all your equipment. The gig's up. Like, this has went on long enough." And I say it with some humor, but I really at times felt, from the beginning of starting this, struggle with that. Like, who am I to sit behind a mic and say anything? And even though, the Wild Courage podcast is just about stories of redemption to give hope, but I still struggle with it. And I struggle with it professionally. Like, my business card says CEO. Dude, I barely graduated from high school. I made a living with my body my whole life, shoeing horses, riding colts, like manual labor, right? And so I remember like getting these meetings of like on the 12th floor of the tallest building in Houston or Pittsburgh or any of these fields, especially in the oil field, right? Where I'm going up in these fancy elevators and I got my nice shirt on and tried to scrub the grease from my fingers because I was operating the machine the day before. Like, sliding that business card across this huge table in a conference room that says CEO, like it would give me panic attacks. Like,
Wow.
I'm like, I don't even understand what CEO means. Like, I just am such a fraud. Like, I'm just a guy with my business partner, Doc, who are in the field wearing lots of different hats. And to that point, one time I was on location in North Dakota in the skid steer, and a safety guy comes up and he's like, "Hey, I need your card because I need to schedule a meeting with something." And I remember sliding my card through the slots of the skid steer, and he looked at it and he said, "CEO, really?" And he laughed and walked away. And I
Wow.
was like, "Damn it." So these are just a couple of the experiences that I've personally dealt with this, because it's like professionally, I definitely feel that, right? Because I'm not educated in the traditional ways of like owning and running and being a partner and being the CEO of a company.
Yeah.
And also like in this space of the podcast and all the things we do with Wild Courage, like I feel it crippling at times when we're doing a retreat and the guys are showing up, and these guys, like, it started local, right?
Yeah.
We had guys from Australia, Canada at our last retreat, like New Jersey, Florida. Like, these guys are paying a lot of money and flying in. And I know it's not because of me, but it's like something I'm a part of. And I'm like, oh crap, this is heavy. Like, why are people showing up to this thing that I'm a part of? You know what I mean? So that's me just kind of being vulnerable in the space of where I've experienced the imposter syndrome of like,
Yeah.
I'm going to get caught.
Yeah. I appreciate your authenticity of that. Jeremy, I was thinking about my business. So, I grew up in construction, working electrical with my dad, and did that for years. And then I ended up going to LA, got in film school, did a bunch of stuff in the film industry for a short time, and then got married and transitioned out of that. And the early part of my marriage was an utter shit show. And honestly, we should have ended up divorced. I mean, there's really good stuff and just really terrible shit. As we were explosive and such a mess. But what I was experiencing was a crash course in humanity. Like, I was having to come face to face with myself or lose my marriage, right? So I'm having this crash course experience in my soul, and eventually I'm watching as it's pouring over into impacting other people. So the knowledge that I'm gaining in my situation is just practically spilling over into other friendships. And organically, I accidentally started a business called Life Consulting. And for me, I felt super fraudulent because I'm seeing that what I have to say is very effective and impactful, but I don't have the formal educational training that other people did. And along the way through the years, I'd have people I'd have two experiences. One was people telling me I spent 10 years in counseling and never got the breakthrough I did in a few sessions with you. On the other side, I'd have people confronting me being like, well, where did you go to college at for this? I went to film school. I was a construction worker before that. And like, some people were like, not people who sat down with me, but people that were investigating, wanted to participate with me were basically like, well, who the fuck are you then to have a conversation with me? You don't know. I went to the school of hard knocks, like going through it and actually choosing into trying to understand myself so I could save myself and save my marriage, so to say. And so for years early on, I found that I would have waves of that imposter syndrome, feeling like, what am I even doing in this field? Am I even helping anyone out? It didn't, like, I could have hundreds of people saying, oh my God, this radically changed my life, which I did. But that wasn't landing because I still saw myself through I had a broken identity. I saw myself through a broken lens, right? I saw myself through an institutional system that says you have to do this plus this to equal this over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good.
And what's fascinating is along the way, I would have people that came out of the institutionalized education system, and they would participate in my space, and they would say, I don't understand why they're not teaching this over there. Like, so they're being educated in counseling and therapies and stuff, and it's a valuable arena to go to. Like, the education is very valuable. However, there was a lot of things that I was doing that they're like, we need this so badly. Why don't they do this? Right. But it didn't matter to me. Like, I would hear that, and I would hear affirmation from people inside of that community. And still I'd be like, but I didn't go to college for it. And to that point, I'm taking this story into this. It doesn't just reach down into the souls of guys who didn't get educated like you and I. Like, I met with let me see how to phrase this. I met with the owner of a major sports team who came to me. So, and a conversation that we basically had with him is, he was just like, I'm waiting for everyone to realize that I have no idea what I'm doing, and that I have no right owning this team. And wow, I have no business being in this place. And we're talking, it was a very successful sports team.
I know it, so I know it's as legit as it gets.
and I'm sitting, and my mind is going, just blowing. Here's a guy who has reached like the pinnacle of success, and he's still having the same conversation. And the reality is this stuff doesn't just stem from us feeling like imposters because we didn't get education and stuff like this. This stems from little boys inside of us who don't know how loved and valuable and worthy that we really are. Like, this inner child within us that still feels broken and on the outside looking in. And I think that that's something that in order for us to tackle imposter syndrome, we have to tackle the pains that are unresolved in our childhood, the lies, the broken identity that we pick up when we're really young. But yeah, that's my journey with it.
I think that's a good point. Like, it's not just professionally. Like, I also recognize it in like my cowboy world, right? Of like, I've been doing this my whole life, the last decade, not professionally, since we started our company. But like, even going to a branding or to a roping, I'm like, now I'm outside looking in of this community because these guys do this for a living, and I hold such high regard for the men and women who make a living doing this, and I just play it now. And so it's like interesting that it's not just a skill set, right? Like, I feel the imposter syndrome because my business card says CEO, and I have no formal business training other than Hard Knocks and life experience. But even I think it can be in the areas that we have skill sets and we've done our whole lives. And it's like, I show up to a branding now and I'm like, I hope I don't fall off my horse. Like, I feel like I'm being judged and scrutinized by the real deal, that I'm no longer in that space. It's not how I feed my family anymore. Right. So I think that for the guy or the person listening to this is like, well, I've just been doing this my whole life, but I still feel like this, even in the thing that I do and have done forever. I'm saying that I think that it's something that happens out of insecurity, and what you were saying earlier, like in our family origin story somewhere, we can pick up narratives of not enoughness.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think leads to the fraudulent adult version of us feeling like we don't have what it takes. And because I look back in my life and in my 20s and 30s, and when I see people show up really big in the room, It's like I needed to be that bigger person because inside I was scrambling for acceptance and to try to fool everybody that I actually knew what I was doing or talking
Yeah.
about. When inside I was like, no. So I think it can be like two ways we show up to this space, right? It's like the overconfident, big, I got it figured out, vocal version, or the quiet guy in the corner that has all the ability and skill, or gal, and whatever it is they're putting their hands to. But inside there's that other narrative of like, I don't have what it takes, and
Yeah.
I don't know how to show up to this with confidence. So can
Yeah.
it be one or the other? It can be the same thing, but you show up different to it.
Yeah. One of the things that words that you're talking about is qualified.
Mm,
Like, what qualifies me? What qualifies me to be a father? What qualifies me to be a friend? What qualifies me to do a podcast? What qualifies me to be part of this group of men? What qualifies me to be a CEO? What, like, what is a qualifier? And like, the end goal or the finish line keeps getting moved. As long
right
as
when
we
you think
have
you're
it.
getting there.
What's that?
Right when you think you're about to get there, it
Uh-huh.
moves. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it keeps moving. Like, I know guys that were like, didn't feel comfortable calling themselves a businessman until they made $1 million. And they made $1 million. Then they weren't qualified until they made 10. Then they made 10 in their business. And they didn't feel qualified until it was like they kept moving it to bigger numbers. Like, yeah, but because there's this deep sense of comparison, right? Because we're trying to ultimately gain some sense of worth or value, and we just don't know where the line is where we say, all right, this is what makes me valuable, because we're looking externally for validators to qualify us rather
So
than an internal qualification that says, I'm qualified because I am, I'm more than enough. Like, for what I'm trying to communicate here is like, as long as I was looking outside of myself to try and decide that I had enough worth and value to participate in any arena, I was constantly finding myself not measuring up. There was a moment in my own journey where I began to say, well, I don't know how else to put this, but there was a conversation between me and my source, or my God, what I call God. There was this place inside of me where I had to say, but God, what do you say about me? I had to find a higher power that was defining who I am, because that is unshakable. Like, once I could find that I could connect to an unconditionally loving source that said
mm,
I was perfectly and wonderfully created. Like, the truth of my being is that I was created in my maker's image. And like, all of a sudden, the noise of my childhood experiences started just silencing. The noise of other people that had criticisms and judgments about me started silencing. And the connection to that truth started silencing the inner critic inside of me. You know, one of the things that I realized in my journey is I've been my own greatest adversary. Greater than anyone else who's come against me, I've been against myself more than anyone else, because I've taken the experiences throughout my journey, the relational exchanges where people did do harsh things or say harsh things, and then I weaponized them against myself.
yep. That's
I
good.
was I became my own greatest critic, saying, you're not enough, you're not qualified to do this. See, this is why you're not. And so I was sitting there bludgeoning myself. And it wasn't until I started, really connecting into that sense of like, God, what do you say about me? Well, God says these things, that I am lovable and that I am more than enough and I am worthy of this journey that I'm on and the things that I'm experiencing. And then my acceptance of that started healing all of this. Like, the imposter syndrome in many different areas of my life started getting repaired through that journey, through me deciding to stop being the greatest adversary in my life. There was a turning point when I actually said, I want to become my own greatest advocate. I want to apprehend a higher truth about me that's not based in my performance or the messy mistakes that I make or, what other people have to say about me, but I want to base the truth of who I am in something that transcends all of that.
So good. That's the same thing that had to happen for me when I was in my lowest, darkest days. It was interesting because I think that sometimes we think, we have an encounter with God and then it's going to change everything, and it does. But it can look different for everyone.
Yeah.
Because I went through that journey of like becoming the beloved of like who he says I am. Same thing, because the version of myself that I saw when I looked in the mirror was worthy of death.
Right.
That was my narrative. And I've shared this a bunch on your podcast, but when I was playing Russian roulette in that cabin in Jackson Hole, in the mornings, I was finding out that I was his beloved through his word. That's where I had to find it, because I couldn't hear any voice other than the accuser of everyone's better off without you. But in that same beautiful time that was happening, by 9-10 o'clock at night, it was the gun in my mouth. It was such a weird paradox of these two things wrestling for my soul at the same time. And I just remember hearing that same thing. Like, what if I am enough? And what if I am his beloved? And what if that's all I need?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I knew that my wife was leaving me. I knew that I was in lots of trouble with the law after had just getting 2 DUIs back to back in 48 hours, like the low, right?
Yeah.
And to me, I wouldn't be sitting here without asking that question and finding that truth for myself. And I know it looks different for everyone, but I think at the end of it, you said the word earlier is like identity and the self narrative, which to me, like as you were speaking all that, it was so good. But the word I just kept hearing was like finding grace for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And like, how do we talk to ourselves, and what's our self narrative? And we're so used to that voice and that loop in our own soul that leaks into our nervous system and our mind and our soul. It's like, how do we get out of that? And compassion and grace for ourselves is the only way that I've kept going because we are going to make mistakes. And use this podcast an example. It's like, I could not listen to this thing for the first 50 episodes, or I would have quit. And it's like, no, you don't know what you're doing, but you're getting reps in, and it's going to make an impact, and you are going to learn how to do this. And it's like the pride wrestle with trying something new that you're uncomfortable with, but also like having grace for myself. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to figure out GarageBand. I don't know computers well. I don't, but because of the journey, to your point earlier of like, I just had compassion for myself. I was like, no, it's okay. Shutting all those voices, outside voices, and even the inner dialogue that I had with myself for so long that I was numb to it, was like, you can do it. Yeah, you're not great at it yet, but keep going.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just one of the things that stood out to me as you were having that dialogue, was like, how important is like self-compassion and grace,
Yeah.
and as part of the antidote to this imposter syndrome thing we're talking about.
Well, you're right. It's really vital. One of the things that we have to do in our lives is come face to face with ourselves. And oftentimes guys run from it all the way to their deathbed. And they're not actually sitting down, looking at the reality of how they've participated in life and what they believe to be true about themselves because of that. So a lot of times they're just like trying to shove it down and just go, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to look at that. Let me just keep moving forward. Right. So they don't have an ability to even give grace and compassion to themselves because they're not willing to look at the reality of the impact that they're having on the world around them because they have too much shame. They have
Mm.
too big of a self-critic. They're just trying to stay separated. So there's a sense of like, in order for us to actually heal from things like imposter syndrome, we have to be willing to come to terms with the reality of us. And we have to begin to realize, like, all right, all of these messy, destructive things that surround my life don't define me. My actions don't define me. Who I am is defined by a higher power. So, like, we feel like in our relationship with judgment, that we have to judge that behavior in order to
Hmm.
course correct. But we always judge that behavior, these destructive elements, as I'm a bad person versus no, this is just destructive behavior that is the result of me believing that I'm unworthy. Every bit of destructive behavior in all of our relationships that we express is all rooted back to something inside of us that says, I am unlovable, I am unworthy. It's rooted back to a part of us that is locked up in some sort of shame or judgment, and we respond accordingly to what we believe to be true about ourselves. And so instead, we can look at this and go, yeah, this is destructive. I have participated in destruction. And this is a result of a really broken belief system in places inside of me that I don't know how to love myself. I don't know how to receive love. And it's only then that we get past this denial band-aid that we have on our lives that we can then begin to go, okay, what does it look like to extend grace and compassion? That doesn't mean our destructive tendencies don't need a change, but the deeper change needs to happen at a heart level that says, I'm extending grace and kindness. Like, one of the things that, let me say this, Wild courage focuses on our story, right? You cannot have grace and compassion without understanding, and you can't have understanding without being connected to your story. And so, for us, when I talk about coming face to face with ourselves, I'm talking about coming to terms with our story, our childhood story, our story in our teenage years, our story as in our college years, our stories as fathers where we failed. Like, what is the story? How is it played out? Do I actually understand how I got to this place? As I get to understanding, this compassion overtakes me. I go, of course I fucked up in those ways. Look at all the components, the wiring of my brain, the wiring of my heart, the experiences that I had would land me right here. I am in need of love and compassion to repair these things inside of me. And as you get connected to that love and that compassion and that grace, all of a sudden you become your own greatest advocate. You're like, here's a guy who's been trying his best. He's screwed things up along the way, but the more he gets love to him, the more beautiful, the more that there's going to be beauty that's expressed through his life. And once you get connected to that, all of a sudden you're like, if my identity is not my behavior, then I don't have to feel like an imposter handing a card that says CEO on it, because this card that says CEO has nothing to do with who I am. This podcast that I'm doing has nothing to do with who I am as I'm extending it out there. This job title, this opportunity, they have nothing to do with who I am. Who I am is a beloved child of God. And I am just being present inside of my story, doing the things that I feel called to do, coming alive inside of my heart. And I'm not judging any of this. Like, I'm not judging the results at all.
So good. I think that's why our retreats and even our fires work, right? Is because it's like, if I can get over the fear of sharing this thing that I've convinced myself that if you knew this about me, I am unlikable and I am ultimately unlovable, and that not being true, it's like, that's what I think the weight you were talking about earlier being lifted is like, wait, I forever, for years or however long, I thought that this thing, if anybody ever knew what I've done, would cripple me. it's so scary, the thought of sharing that with someone. And then when you do, and it's met back with nothing but love, compassion, understanding, and no judgment, that's where I feel like it can be possible to change the self narrative we have about who we are. And then ultimately to start making different choices based on that new information that's in our brain, right?
Yeah. That's really good. You're touching on, so if you ever knew, right? That statement is a statement of like, you can feel like you can have imposter syndrome just in the places where people just think, like, people will be like, you're such a great guy, I love you so much.
Such a good dad. Well, if
Yep.
you don't talk to my kids.
Yeah. If you really knew these stories, if you knew these stories, oh, you're such a great husband. Well, if you ever knew these stories. And so these things that we hide inside of our secrets, where we're not being authentic. This is getting back to the early part of the conversation, whereas like authenticity.
Mm.
Once you get authentic about the reality of your life, saying, I'm going to expose these parts of my heart, all of a sudden these things that lie to us and say, but if they knew, they wouldn't love you. If they knew, they wouldn't respect you. They wouldn't honor you. They wouldn't give you opportunities if they really knew these things about you. But then once you crack open that shell that's hiding all that stuff behind it, you go, take a look at this. Here's what's really going on inside of me. And then you have brotherhood that looks at you and says, oh, dude, you have no fucking idea. Let me tell you about me. And all of a sudden you continue to get that. You go, oh, you know what? We're all in the same boat. We've all been hiding inside of ourselves these secrets of these things that we've done that we think disqualify us. And now once we're getting authentic and honest about ourselves and getting it out on the table, all of a sudden we realize that we're not a fraud. We're not imposters. We are actually lovable in the midst of our greatest messiness.
That's it. That's so true. And even just having this conversation and hearing you say all that, like, I it's opening my eyes to the areas of my own soul where I've been hiding from things that make me feel this way and that I know aren't true about myself. But that's what's powerful about, like you said, the brotherhood is like, once you have that sacred space where you can be authentic, then you let guys, the brothers, speak into those places with constant vulnerability and authenticity. It's like the antidote to it. It's like, oh no, that's not who you are, and that's not how I experience you. Oh wait, I thought you experienced me this way. A lie, a narrative that's not true. And then it's like, oh, and it doesn't create arrogance. It creates self-worth and identity and people calling you up, not out, but
Yeah.
up, right? Like, no, wait, we're all aiming higher here. We're going somewhere inside, and then everyone in our sphere of influence gets to experience a healthier version of ourselves that doesn't have false humility and isn't arrogant and prideful, but is confident, because there's a huge difference, right? I
Yes.
love being around confident people that have figured out, like, my whole goal in all this is like, I want to be confident and humble at the same time. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to get there. I'm not there yet, but my goal is for people to experience a confident, humble, masculine, soft version of who I want to be. And it's through conversations like this that help us all get there, I think.
Yeah. You know, a confident, humble person is really just a person who knows their worth and their value and therefore has nothing to prove. Like somebody who's prideful and arrogant, like what that really is that is someone who is consistently feeling insecure inside of themselves and doing everything they can to prove that they're worthy and they're valuable. So they're ultimately like look at how big my house is, and look at how much money I have, and look at all these accomplishments and the little awards everywhere. And there's this boasting isn't a celebration of their life. It's a boasting to like prove, like, I need you to know that I am great because I don't believe that I'm great. Whereas someone that is like, no, I just know I'm worthy regardless of the actions, the externals, regardless of that, I know that I'm a valuable child of God. That person all of a sudden can share in their victories with other people. And it's just like, oh, I'm just inviting you into the celebration of life, right? And so that confident, humble person, they're not there to dominate people. They're not there to tear other people down so that they can feel better about themselves. They're there to lift other people up because they already know their intrinsic value inside of themselves. And they're a refreshing person to be around. Like, it's so refreshing to be around a confident, humble person because you feel like you have permission to be your greatest self around them.
Because they're not threatened by you.
They're not threatened by you.
I have this picture in my head all the time of what this warrior looks like. And he's battle tested and scarred. And he has this sword that's shielded. It's in its sheath.
Yeah.
He walks into a room. He doesn't have to swing it around. He doesn't have to show anybody that he knows how to use it. But by the way he carries himself, everybody in the room knows he knows how to use that sword.
Yep.
But he's never the guy that's swinging it around and doing party tricks with it and like, watch what I can do. But understanding this gives me so much compassion and grace for the guy who shows up swinging it around.
Yeah.
Because of what you just said. It's like, oh, he's actually insecure.
Yes.
And he's scared to death.
Yeah.
And that lends itself to compassion. So like, what an arrogant prick. I don't want anything to do with them.
Right.
It's like, no, I get it. Because I've been that guy.
Yep.
I've been that guy. I was that guy for a long time. In some areas, I know I still am. Where I feel insecure, it's like, no, hey, look at what I'm doing. Look over here. Like, deflecting the reality of that. No, I'm very insecure about this thing. And so it's just more grace and compassion that we get to have towards ourselves. And something I say more than anything on repeat is something that you told me one time was, you can't give away what you don't have. And so when I see somebody, a man especially, because that's I spend a lot of time with, that's hard and bitter and disenfranchised and all these things, I'm like, well, that's how he feels really about himself. He doesn't have grace and compassion to give away because he has none for himself.
Yeah.
And that just helps with understanding in the business of trying to have grace and compassion for people. If you're in the compassion business, it's like, it's so helpful to understand that. And like, no, I get it. I get how scary it is and why as men we do that. But finding that balance of compassion and strong and all the things is, I think, the goal.
Yeah. You talked about fear inside of that, right? And that's at the root of the whole imposter syndrome is I'm really scared that people are going to find out that I'm a fraud. One of the things that men don't like to admit oftentimes is like, I feel really scared. I'm not just saying admit outwardly. They don't want to admit to themselves inwardly. Like, there'll be guys listening to this and be like, I'm not scared of any of that. But they're just in denial. Like, their best friend is denial. No, I'm not scared.
It's weakness, right?
Yeah.
Fear is, we consider it weakness instead of invitation into what's behind the fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the real power is found when we face our fear and we begin to conquer it internally. We begin to overcome it. We begin to break the lies that are associated with it. We begin to take back our life. Like, to me, the most powerful thing that I can do, the most masculine thing I can do is go inward and begin to tackle the mountains inside of my own soul and begin to climb them and be like, I'm going to face every last fear and insecurity and sadness and pain and every bit of grief. Like, I'm going to go do the most difficult work possible internally. And I've done that. And to me, that I'm like, that's powerful work, is to acknowledge like, oh, I have a mountain of fear in this area and I don't know how to conquer it, but I'm going to keep facing it until I do conquer it. Like, that's manly. That's powerful to me. But one of the things that it takes is letting go of our relationship with denial. Like, we have to acknowledge, you know what? I probably have denial, a massive amount of denial in certain areas of my life. I started asking questions like, where do I have denial in my life? That was a question, an internal question that I asked. And then I started slowly having these things just get highlighted. Oh, you're denying this and you're denying that. And then I was like, all right, what's behind the denial? What is it protecting? What is the thing that I need to face? I've got denial here because I don't want to face my fear of this thing over here. And so embracing the idea that like we all have these fears and they don't just go away by denying them. They go away by us facing them. And if we can see that again as a powerful trait, all of a sudden it becomes appealing. Like, oh, this is good. And this is a manly thing to do, to face the fears that are inside of me instead of just ignoring them and acting like they don't exist. Okay, challenge accepted. I'll jump on that bandwagon.
And I think that's the thing I've learned from you most. If I were to describe you to somebody in a small sentence, is, and I've told you this before, like, you're the bravest person I've ever met. And it wasn't a one-off. Like, it's not this sense of arrival of like, oh, I figured out my marriage, or where I was an asshole, or where I needed to change and set boundaries of how I let people treat me. Like, you're constantly going after these things. So I say all that to say, these aren't things you just talk about. In all the years I've known you, and when we check in, it's like, oh, you're going after another place that has some fear involved in it. And you helping me walk through that, like, it's true. The freedom from bondage, which is fear, is on the other side of that scary thing. But without help and understanding how to get through that, you just sit in it, because it's like, okay, great. I don't know how to do that. I get the concept of it. I understand that it's important to face my fears and get out of denial in all these areas of where I've told myself that time heals all wounds and all the other bullshit that we've been taught, right? It's getting someone to help you get through it that has done it and gone before you. And that's what you've been for me, is like, oh, you need to have a really hard conversation with whoever, or attack this fear in your marriage, or the lies that you've believed about what your marriage could be, or your finances. So I think an important part of this conversation is recognizing it, one, but then actually doing something about it.
Yeah.
And it's no different than anything else. It's like, I don't know how to take the transmission out of my truck and fix it. I could take it out, but I can't take it apart and fix it. Like, it's impossible. So what do? I just ignore it.
Yeah.
Like, my transmission in my old 93 Dodge has been slipping for 4 years. So this is a perfect analogy for any truck person. Like, instead of dressing it, because I have fear, I don't know how to do it. So I just white knuckle it. I'm like, okay, baby, I hope today's the day, because I need to go to the dump because it's full of trash. Like, I hope that we make it one more day. And I feel like that's how I've approached these fearful things in my life, is like, if I can just get through this interaction with whoever one more time, and then I'll deal with it another day. It's like, no, I admit that I don't know what I'm doing, and I need to get a mechanic.
Yeah.
And that's what you've been for me, as a mechanic.
I need help.
I need help, and it's okay.
I don't have to fix this transmission. Like, I can actually have someone help me fix it
instead of avoiding it.
Yeah. You know, I don't know how much time we have left, but I have one other tiny story at least that I wanted to share.
Yeah, go.
I remember I went through a whole season where I wasn't working for a couple of years there. I grew up working. I started working at 13 years old. I never didn't work. If I wasn't working, I was in school, right? Like that was, everything was like very much had an identity in the work that I did. And my first year of marriage, we didn't work for a whole year, and that was breaking my soul daily. I felt like such a worthless loser, um, because I was just depleting my savings down to nothing. And over the next 2 or 3 years, I would only kind of work in the summers for my dad at his electrical business. I would fly back home, work for him, whatever. And then the rest of the time, like I was trying to figure out life. Like I felt like there was this divine pause that was like causing me to face myself, which is where everything I do got developed. But I remember this one moment. Abby had a job and I didn't, and she was providing for us. And her and I were on a walk, and I was talking about like I didn't know what I was even doing with my life or where my life was going. And it was so connected to my identity that like every day I was feeling a heavier and heavier depression, to the point where I had a lot of suicidal ideation. Like, I am nothing, I'm doing nothing, I'm adding nothing to this world. And as we were on this walk talking about life, all of a sudden I start crying, and I lean up against this tree and I just slide down this tree, and I just start saying, "You married a loser. You married a fucking loser. You should just leave me. I'm just a loser. I have nothing to add." Like, my identity was so inside of the things outside of myself that I perceived myself as unworthy of having my marriage, because my wife was providing for that season. And I was having to face something that was so scary inside of me, which was this deep sense of I'm not valuable unless I'm providing for my household, and I don't have anything worth living for if I'm not providing for this household. And it's good to provide. Like, it's good to be actively involved. I'm not talking about sitting around playing video games all day long,
Yeah.
and that should just be our lifestyle. But I was having to face this thing inside of me that I was terrified of looking at. And I was terrified of it coming out in a way that my wife would see it. That was one of the most vulnerable experiences, was for her to see the ugliest part of my soul that said, you married a loser. Like, that was so exposing. But once I said that out loud, I finally heard myself in a whole new way. Like, I got authentic, the authenticity, the truth all of a sudden spilled forth. And I'm like, here's the monster that's berating me inside of myself. And I remember after that day, after I did that, I was like, wow, like, I am in my own personal hell right here. And it so stands in opposition to the reality that my life is valuable whether or not I'm working. And like, all of a sudden I started having these epiphanies, and I started letting go of this area of imposter syndrome. But it took me going to a place that felt so exposing, right? So vulnerable, so weak, to get to the point of expressing that. And the reason I'm saying this is that I imagine that some guys are listening, and it's like, you've been holding something back so far and hiding it so deep that, like, the bravest thing that you could do is expose it in a way that, might leave you feeling uh like, I don't know how to put it, like, oh, if I share this with my wife, or I share this with my friends, they might actually leave me, or they might actually finally be like, you're right, I've known this all along, and this just confirms what I already believe. Thank you. Now you give me permission to walk out. Because I think that was a fear inside of me unconsciously, is that if I actually expose this, it'll validate the truth, and it'll give you permission to leave me.
Mm.
And what it did is it caused my wife to have an immense amount of compassion, to tell me, like, I love you. Like, this doesn't define who you are. You're an incredible man. And all of a sudden I got truth inside of me. Like, I broke the barrier that was in my heart and got truth down into that spot. And it was a massively transformational moment for me.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that story. That saying, like, what if your dreams come true? Like, what if our biggest fears don't come true?
Yeah.
What if these things that terrify me don't happen? I think statistically, isn't it like 98% of the things we worry about never
Yeah,
transpire.
something like that.
And I think it's amazing that you and I have had that experience in our marriage where we've got to be vulnerable and authentic and honest. And I just want to say to like, I know there's guys out there right now that are like, your marriage is in a place where that's not on the table for you. Maybe that's the invitation to come to the retreat or get on our website, find a local fire. Like if that's not possible for you yet and where you're at in your marriage and you know that to be true, I know there's some guys that are in that position right now. Like come get with some guys that you can be authentic with and start making some different choices and change some belief systems about yourself so that you can create an environment and home at home where you can someday have those conversations with your wife. And we've seen that happen over and over and over again with the men that we're walking with and on this journey with. So I get Justin and I both get the weight of that fear. But it's worth it because the freedom is on the other side of all of this, and you're worth it. You're worthy of freedom, whether you believe it or not. You all are. And with that, Justin, thank you so much. How can people find you? What do you got going on for courses? I think one of yours just started, so it might be too late to sign up for the current one. But what do you guys got cooking over there at the Connected Life?
Yeah. So if you want to find out more about me, you can go to Justin and Abby, that's abi.com. And you can check out some of our different courses. We do have a course running right now that my wife is leading that I think it's closed now called Reclaiming You. And it's about healing our nervous system and building emotional resilience. But we have multiple other courses like the Compassion Project or the Father Series, which is the Father Series
So
is
good.
like, man, that's like a year's worth of counseling wrapped up in one process there that addresses father wounds and healing the father wound inside of us. So we have that, and you can find us. You can find the Connected Life on YouTube by going to justinandabby.com/the Connected Life, and it'll bring you right to our YouTube, and you can check it out there. We're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So that's kind of what's happening with us right now.
Yeah. And I love that you're so consistent and just your podcast is like, so you're such a heavy hitter. And I love the people you bring on. And if any of these types of conversations interest you guys, like go check out their podcast and their catalog because I don't think there's any topic that you guys have not touched on in
Oh yeah.
depth. And so you've got a lot of content out there to be consumed and to learn and grow from. So thank you again so much. I love you and just appreciate all that you've done for me and my family. And in this mission, you've locked arms with us so much. And thank you for doing that. Love
I
you,
love
bro.
I love you too. Thank you for having me on, bud.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Adios. Oh, hey, go to our website if you want to find out more about the retreat and about what's going on. And if you want to find a fire in your area, see if there's anything going on, you can always find us there. I always forget to say that. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Adios.
Later.